Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is the second session of Prerna Circles. The idea behind Prerna Circles, as the name suggests, is to create platforms where learning can be exchanged, platforms which can support reflection, and where
Your voice is breaking a
The
little.
voice is breaking.
oh, just a second. Is it better now?
Yes. Yeah. Almost.
Okay, if it breaks, then Mansi, maybe you can.
Yeah, and now we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I was just welcoming everyone to the second session of Prerna Circle and wanted to share that the platform has been created. Oh, it's not better. Oh, no.
Pratishtha is still bad.
I'll just rejoin. Mansi, maybe you can give the introduction.
Yeah, I can. Great. All right. So welcome everybody to our second session of Prerna Circles. So Prerna Circles, as you know, as Pratishtha was saying, as the name suggests, is a platform where we really want to inspire and help inspire this group of people who are working within Project Sampurna and really bring in people who are doing inspiring work in the ecosystem to share their experiences and learnings of working on ground for so long and having such insightful, insights into the work on ground that's happening. So the objective of Prerna Circles is really to get outside in perspective and really help everyone, help the group consolidate and understand, what's going on around across different organizations, and really use those learnings to better, take Project Sampurna in the areas that we're working in, which is Jharkhand and Telangana. So I think, that's a little bit about Project Sampurna. So today for the first time, we're doing a panel session. So if there are some, brief hiccups along the way, so, just apologies in advance for that. But we really wanted to bring together practitioners from different areas of, working on social emotional learning and understand their experiences. And we're really, really honored to, host all of you today, and thankful to all of you for taking out 2 hours of your day, which I can understand is not easy during pandemic when every day there are like a million calls. So thank you so much for that. I'll just quickly hand it over back to Pratishtha to take us through a brief overview of what the session would look like today.
Thank you so much, Mansi. So I'll just quickly talk about the main section of this session, and then we can probably jump into talking about who the panelists are and what they will be talking about. Today in the session, we want to generally talk about everyone's learnings from practicing in the SEL. We'll begin with an overview of the SEL landscape from the lenses of each of the organizations. Today, we are joined by members of the Labhya Foundation, Learning Curve Foundation, and NalandaWay. So we'll begin with an overall context on SEL. After that, we will be talking about what have been the different experiences of working with adversities, what are some ecosystem level changes that we have observed. And thirdly, we will be talking about some learnings from implemented programs. And lastly, we'll be opening it up for any questions that the attendees and the participants have for the panel. So that's the overall, how the session will look like. And without any further ado, I'll also like to introduce our speakers for today. So from Labhya, we have Richa Sharma. She is the co-founder of Labhya Foundation. Labhya has worked on curriculum contextualization in Uttarakhand and worked on SEL solutions for children in need. Richa leads teams to develop SEL-based curriculum, teacher training, and evaluation at scale in partnership with governments. She also serves on the board of Yuva and UNICEF India. From Learning Curve Foundation, we have Subbu Parameswaran. He is the co-founder and CEO of Learning Curve, a non-profit dedicated to transforming education for underserved children through social emotional learning. Prior to joining the development sector, Subbu has also worked for 15 years in pharmaceuticals industry in UK and India, and also briefly in the development and consulting experience. We also have Swapna Samba from Learning Curve. She's the head of the public school programs at Learning Curve. With 14 years of experience with teaching and program management in the development sector, Swapna now manages large programs at organizations such as Nandi Foundation. From NalandaWay, we have Shriram and Akansha. Shriram Iyer is the founder of NalandaWay. NalandaWay Foundation helps disadvantaged children to realize their dreams through the power of arts. Named by the Outlook magazine as one of the top 50 social entrepreneurs, Sriram has received numerous awards, including World Bank's Development Marketplace Award, Architect of the Future by Walsall Institute, and Millennium Award by FICCI and USA. Akansha is a drama-based facilitator, education consultant, and founder of Ripple Effect. She's been working extensively with teachers, parents, students, and system transformation projects with large-scale organizations, serving disadvantaged children in the space of mental well-being, SEL, and we welcome you all, and it's a delight to have everybody, and it's an honor to have such an esteemed panel today for this session. So welcome once again. And before we move on to the session, it would be great to hear from the participants as well as to what they want the panelists to be talking about. So we have a Menti link here, and I would request all the attendees to just share what they would like the panelists to be talking about today.
No out of syllabus questions, please.
Would request everyone to just take 2 minutes and quickly put in any kind of expectations you have from the session.
So I hope all of these are within your syllabus and not.
Yeah, I particularly like one or two of them. So
Great.
Okay. Sorry, am I audible? Because my voice was breaking.
Yeah, yeah. But I think you might have to speak a little louder. Then I think we.
Okay. So I think overall, the questions that we have are to understand what have been some of the adaptations which the organizations have had to make during COVID to make sure that SEL reaches all students and especially the ones who are in disadvantaged situations. Um, then there are also questions on bridging the gap between academics and SEL and traditional approaches with parents and teachers and SEL. How do we make sure that it's treated with relevance at the school level, at the parent level, and the teacher level? And there are also a few questions on assessment. How do we assess teacher behavior? How can we measure SEL output? So broadly, I think these three are some of the key things that our participants want to understand today. And hopefully some of this will be covered by the panelists as we go along the session. So I'll stop sharing now. Yeah, would like the panelists to share something.
Pratishtha, if we miss any of these, please bring them in because you have access to that slide. So you can always bring that in at the end. If we miss answering any of these, if we miss responding.
Don't worry, we'll make sure that you answer all these questions today.
Yes, we'll definitely leverage the Q&A for that in case some of it gets missed out on. Great. Before we start, just wanted to understand if the panelists want to share anything about their work or about themselves before we begin and dive into the session. Great. I think then we can start. Yeah, over to you, Man.
Great. Pratisha, do you want to spotlight all the speakers?
Yeah.
Great. So I think just to before we dive into all the in-depth questions about social emotional learning, I think really what we've also been racking our brains about and have definitely heard a lot about and try to also understand ourselves is during when COVID hit, both first wave and second wave, especially in the first wave, there was a lot of challenges in accessing the students, the learners, and also the need for social emotional learning really skyrocketed at that point. So what we're really getting at is trying to understand how did each of you within each of your organization try to understand what are the needs of the learners during pandemic. It's a very as basic as what do they need right now. Do they need do they need to learn, do we need to bridge their learning gaps? Do we need to work on something else? Just want to understand how did we try to understand what they need at this point. And please feel free to just go ahead if you have something already in mind. We don't want to specifically call out anybody.
So I have a slide to share, Mansi. I'm okay with it. Subbu, Richa, go ahead and maybe when it's out and I can share that. Is that okay? So I think I'll keep going in and out of that presentation because based on the questions that we're responding to. One moment. Mansi, you need to give me access to screen sharing to be able to share my presentation. So let me start. Yes, it is working. Thank you. Yeah, give me a moment. So to start with, just want to talk about what I do. My role at NalandaWay is of lead for the mental well-being and SEL practice. What that means is across all projects, we are looking at what problems we are solving. Are those the right kind of problems? Are we solving them the right way? And how do we know that that our solutions are working? So everything from the start to end, we're applying a well-being lens to a lot more projects now than we used to, as you shared contextually. Also, it has in the last 2 years, it's been a flurry of projects in this space driven by needs. So let me quickly jump into the programs just to give you a background of the demographic that we are serving. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, no, just a moment. Yeah, so we work with youth, and I'm only going to talk about the adolescent project. So we work with children from 3 onwards, 3 to 18. In one particular case, up to they will turn 21. But I'm only going to focus on the adolescent piece of this because that's the focus here. These are the different contexts that we are working in. These are the youth we are serving. Just to give you a very broad picture of where our programs are situated. So, and all of these are well-being programs. We're again focusing on those here. So one is youth with disabilities, and this is what we found out about what they specifically need. And all of these have come from primary research. They have come from direct needs analysis that we've conducted with the population that we are working with. And so we complement what we understand, rather than complement, we triangulate what we understand from secondary learning with voices from the ground directly. So all of this is capturing what the populations have come up with. So youth with disabilities, for instance, we realize that apart from loss of learning and well-being issues, they also have unhealthy coping mechanisms. So that's a shift that we needed to help them make. I'm just going to quickly go over this, and maybe if any of you have questions, we can take it up later. We are working with adolescents in childcare institutions, and there almost all the children have a traumatic background, different intensities and kinds of trauma. So we are taking a trauma-informed approach. Just to also tie this together, all of our interventions are art-based interventions. So I'll come to that later. But in this case, we are also using a trauma-informed lens to the intervention. And we realize that the place to start working with them is to help them restore their sense of self, which is damaged because of the trauma. So that's the place we are beginning with, and going on to create a sense of safety, physical and emotional safety for themselves in the community, in the shelters. We're working with adolescents from educationally backward rural blocks in Tamil Nadu in particular, with the government and with UNICEF. And there, the realization is that these blocks where the education outcomes are the poorest also, not surprisingly, coincide with backwardness on other socio-economic indicators. So on all fronts, these youth are the worst off in terms of access, opportunities, and the biggest gaps that we see in learning as well as well-being are to be found here. So apart from low literacy and learning levels, there is also very specific issues around parents having to leave their adolescents home, and the concerns around safety, interactions with the opposite sex, where the adolescent also struggles. Parents are also struggling with it. And while child marriage was an issue that had been addressed by the state government and UNICEF over time, it seems to have come back now. Because parents prefer marrying off their children rather than risking unhealthy interactions or the fears that they are possessed with, their understanding of sexuality. So these are the specific issues that we found through our field team. We're also working with vulnerable youth in urban slums, and these are typically the communities that we have identified are conflicted communities where we're finding a high rate of crime and violence. So in Tamil Nadu, this is in and around Chennai. The online medium has been difficult for them. So even though they have access, digital access more than what youth in rural areas have, they're having issues around actually learning and absorbing. There's substance abuse to a great extent, and safe sex practices. That's a big gap in their understanding and awareness. One of our programs works specifically with adolescent girls who are from vulnerable communities, and we're running this program in a few cities for now, where while access was always an issue when it comes to girls and women, so we're working with 13-year-olds on a long-term program for about 7-8 years. And they have socioeconomic vulnerabilities because of the communities they belong to, where there is a history of abuse, trauma, abandonment, which has been exacerbated because of the lockdown, because they're having to be home and they're having to take on tasks which take them away from formal learning or leave less time for formal learning, and also expose them to a lot more risk, physical and emotional risk. So that's just on the whole. I'm going to stop sharing here and pass on to Subbu and Richa.
Thank you so much, Akanksha. Subbu, do you want to go first? I'm happy to go. Okay, awesome. I put a quick slide together. So I'll quickly share my screen. And thank you so much, Akanksha, for that context and going in depth, because I think that really leads to what I think will be relevant now. So just before I pull up the slides, very quick context. So we at Labhya, we've been around for about 4.5 years now. And essentially what we do is partner with governments, multilaterals, and nonprofits to make social emotional learning accessible to children between ages 5 to 15 in schools, and then 16 to 25 out of school or institutionalized settings. So that's basically what we do. We partner with a bunch of different stakeholders. So when this question was asked, I kept on wondering what would be the best way to summarize, what we did and how we recognize and what kinds of needs we recognize. So I think Akanksha, your sort of presentation gave a great head start to that. I'll quickly share my screen. Can you see a presentation which is yellow and blue?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, so essentially our stakeholders are 4 people. Children are obviously at the center, and teachers are who we work with, and then primarily governments, nonprofits, and multilaterals. So once we understood that the pandemic was here and here to stay, we had a couple of calls to take, and most of those judgments were defined by urgency and what our niche was and what we could contribute in a short amount of time for our stakeholders. When we spoke to our children, at that time, we were connected to multiple children across all the states that we work with. What we understood was that parental support was required for the children to feel supported. So we can give all these fancy SEL activities to our children, but they had to do it in an environment which they were sharing with 2 parents, grandparents, siblings, etc. Another thing we realized, which is now obviously very obvious, which is that low-tech engagement was important. Everything from IVRS to SMS to sending 2D sort of posters on WhatsApp to children who had WhatsApp groups with teachers was important to engage them. And we definitely needed a differentiated response for children in urban settings and children in rural settings, even though we were working with the government for all children. So these were the 3 key areas that we decided to focus on. And most of our interventions, which I think we'll talk about going forward, were around this. For example, for parents, we had SMS, IVRS going at 5:30 every evening. We were working with Dream a Dream, who's a partner in the Delhi government happiness curriculum. For this, WhatsApp posters for children in Uttarakhand, and also live YouTube videos, because we realized a lot of children in the urban settings could access at least some of those videos or some of those recordings. So if they had an option, they would go and look at these live happiness classes, live SEL classes, which they could also help interact with their parents with. The second was teacher. So definitely teachers needed a gender specific response. Of course, teacher well-being is at the center and a lot was happening, but a lot of our teachers are women who had to not only understand how to teach online, but also were expected to provide at home, were expected to spend more time with their kids, with their families. And so how can we make sure that we provided well-being spaces for teachers which were specific to the gendered needs that they had, and understood and empathized with the balance that they had to create in their lives very suddenly. The third was governments. I think this was the most interesting response, and I'll come to our biggest learning right after the slide. But essentially what we realized was that the government needed to know what and how. And we had the agility at that point of time to understand, if we know the what and the how can we go about and implement the things that we went about implementing in 2 to 3 weeks of time. They needed
आवाज आ तो रहा है।
आप म्यूट कर सकते
हैं। अभिदा जी आएंगे जैसे ही आते।
Thank you. So with governments, what we also realized that our expertise mattered, and the expertise we had already created in the government ecosystem would come to use in scaffolding what existing solutions we had, which was an offline curriculum, which was very explicitly done in classrooms 30 minutes every day, to something which can be clubbed into a 30-second audio that goes to children every evening. And we also focused on teacher capacity building. We realized that we may not have access to children, but in states like Uttarakhand, where we were just starting our program, we could use the year to orient our teachers through online training, workshops, orientations, to understand how they can make sure that when children walk into schools after the pandemic, they feel safe. And the last one was definitely governments needed immediate response. They needed something that is snappy, that can be done quickly, and that required minimal resources or existing resources. Lastly, nonprofits and multilaterals, what we saw was there was genuinely a recognizable expertise gap with nonprofits and multilaterals that did not work on well-being. And everyone around us who was working with young people directly realized that their programs were not important, children's well-being was important, and therefore they needed an immediate response, but they did not have the expertise to create that response, which is where our partnerships piece really flourished during the pandemic, and I'll talk more about it in the questions to come. And of course, there was a need to improvise their existing programs on the go. So some nonprofits required that they already have access to young people virtually, even digitally at times, and they have a program, but it's not working. Children don't feel good. They don't feel like attending classes. Lots of things are happening, losing touch with their peers. So how do we reframe those programs? How do we reframe our theory of change in these trying times? Lastly, what we realized and what was our biggest learning through all of this was that urgency surpassed resource scarcity. Before that, at least, our belief was that, nonprofits will not work with us if they don't have the resources, etc. How will governments do this? Ek file pass karwane mein काफी time lag jata hai. But actually, everyone realized the urgency with which we were working, and resources came along, whether it was financial, people, structures, infrastructure. It all kind of built along, and actually our agility as a team helped in understanding how we can respond to this urgency, holistically. So I'll stop here and pass it over to Subbu.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Richa. Thanks, Akanksha, for sort of sharing that so generously. I don't have a slide for this one, to be honest. I think there are some slides which I think Swapna is most capable of sort of presenting in terms of actual implementation, things like that. But since I have my 10 minutes in the spotlight, I want to reframe the question, and I don't want to talk about it like SEL in this context. It somehow makes me feel that basically SEL was only required when the pandemic came along. Why was SEL not required before then? SEL was supposed to be as much a part of development, as much a part of education, as much a part of adulthood. So it seems to me that we're talking about SEL is required now as a band-aid, and then we go back to business as usual. We'll all talk about learning loss and learning gaps, right? So I don't subscribe to that view, first of all. And at Learning Curve, we don't subscribe to that. So the cornerstone of our work is based on three things. One is basically there is no such thing as cognitive and non-cognitive. That is the first principle of all learning, because brain science shows that learning, memory, decision making, and all of that actually happens at the intersection of emotion and cognition. There is a saying there is a very powerful statement in this book called Education, Learning, and the Brain, Emotions, Learning, and the Brain by Dr. Imodino Yang, where she says, we feel, therefore we learn. Haven't we all had subjects in school where we never liked a subject? Right? There's been one subject, at least in our school, which we didn't like. And most of us didn't like that subject, not because of the subject itself, but either because of the way it was taught to us or because of the environment, right? And that kind of proves my point. Your emotion is extremely strongly connected to all learning. And therefore, the first cornerstone of our work is basically that there is no such thing as cognitive and non-cognitive. And therefore, SEL is a part of everything that we do, every decision that we make, every feeling that we have, whether we are in school, whether we are at home, doesn't matter where we are. The second principle basically that we've used in our work is to simply say that SEL only works best when all stakeholders are involved. We cannot afford to go in with this viewpoint that here's a curriculum that we derived, here's a framework that we wrote, here's a set of lesson plans that somebody will deliver, and let me go in there with an assessment. Doesn't work. Unless and until basically we figure out a way that you can work this systemically. When I say systemically, it means that all stakeholders are involved. We have no hope in hell of SEL becoming a part of anything. So therefore, that's a second principle on which our work is based on. The third is basically that SEL can be taught. SEL can be taught. In fact, it must be taught explicitly. And again, this is not my statement. This is basically coming out of science, coming out of literature that is saying basically that explicit SEL instruction is far more effective than you bundling it into something. Right? So that's the third cornerstone of our work, and it can be measured. And it can be measured. Just like anything else, it can be measured, it can be assessed, not in the same way as we know assessments, perhaps, but it can still be measured. So these three principles always form the basis of what we've done at Learning Curve. Therefore, our work at Learning Curve is one program and one program only, which is called Accelerate, but it includes 5 components of any SEL program that needs to be there. One is teacher development. We don't call it teacher training, we call it teacher development, because the focus is simply around the teacher's own social emotional learning. It has nothing to do with how the teacher takes any curriculum and puts it into a classroom. It's completely based around that. The second is a student curriculum, which of course is needed because we still need a way to get it into the classroom. So Accelerate basically, which is our program, actually has an age-graded student SEL curriculum all the way from 6 years to 15 years, based on a very robust framework drawn out of stalwarts like Castle, etc. The third piece is around school practices, where we have a framework around how the school needs to practice SEL and make SEL part of the DNA of the school and not make it just one subject, one this, one that. The fourth is parent engagement, which is really around how do parents basically bring SEL home, and how do parents and children then work collaboratively to make sure that SEL becomes a DNA of the home as much as it is in the school. And finally, how do you know that it all works? Basically, which is our assessment suite. So we have a entire set of assessments. I sometimes cringe at the word assessments when it comes to SEL, but it's a necessary evil. Otherwise, we don't get funded. So basically, we need to use that. So we have assessments that focus on 2 things. One is basically around outcome, which is your standard baseline, endline, delta, and all of that sort of stuff. But more importantly, also process. Of how does it all work, right? So when we look at teacher development, we're not assessing teacher behavior. We are assessing how a teacher's own social emotional learning is working. How is that journey working for him or her? So these are the 5 sort of components of our program. So we have only one program. So when all of this happened, honestly, basically, we actually waited and we listened. We just waited. We didn't do anything for a while. I think, Swapna, if I'm not wrong, I think we didn't do anything for 2 months at least. We just waited. We listened. We spoke to our teachers. Said, what do we do? What's going on? We just want to understand. And only after that, basically, I don't even know whether to call it pivoted. Essentially, we just used a different delivery model to ensure that we got SEL to where it belonged, which was the home. And that's really all we did, and that's all we're doing even now. In fact, it has actually become one of the more stronger strands, basically, where we are able to take SEL back home and bring that to life to both parents and children. So I mean, I don't want to talk about SEL in this context or that context. I think SEL will always need to be a part of our lives. And to answer one more question that was there on the panel, is it a good to have or a must have? I don't think there is a good enough response for that. It is either a must have or not at all. I mean, so that's all I had to say, really. I think in terms of setting the context, I guess. And Swapna will, of course, as we go to more questions, I think Swapna can talk a little bit more about how exactly we did and what we did. So yeah, that's my time, guys.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I think this is very, very interesting to understand, and also like different approaches that each organization sort of took. But even though they're different, there is a lot of similarity as well. So I think that definitely is very very valuable to learn. And so I think your point on not jumping into something and really waiting and listening from the teachers what they want and what are their needs in this time, I think is definitely something that we resonate with a lot as well. Just want to take a pause and see if I know a lot of like interesting conversations are going on in the chat side by side, but just want to see if anyone has any question on this particular aspect to the panelists. Would love to open the floor for everyone.
Mansi, I think there were two questions on like trauma-based understanding that, how do we, is there a framework by even the tools exist? So I think there were two questions on that. Maybe that could be one thing.
Yeah, I think we can definitely take that. I think that was
We've responded over chat actually. We've put the response also. Arushi from our team has put the responses as well. That's on NalandaWay's behalf.
All right, great. Any other questions beyond that, or we could move on to the next part of the discussion?
I just have a comment in response to what Subbu shared. I couldn't agree more, Subbu, about SEL as not as a band-aid, but as something that was always around and needed. I've been in the space for a decade now, and it's very frustrating to see people not recognize what is so obvious. What you spoke about, learning being not just cognitive, but also emotional and physical even, right? At the intersection of all of our faculties. But I think what has happened, and that connects to what Richa shared, is that it has suddenly been thrown into sharp focus because of the pandemic. It's become almost like a fire that needs to be put out. So to my mind, as much as I want to say told you so, like we had to invest in SEL all along. But I'm also seeing it as an opportunity to make a case for SEL and to make a case for making inroads for continuing what we are starting right now in these 2 years, because a lot more access, a lot more funding, partnerships, focus has come into the sector because of the pandemic, directed towards well-being in SEL. So yeah, I just want to build on what you said, but I see this as a great opportunity to just keep that momentum going or the conversation going around how this is needed on an ongoing basis. Just wanted to
again, I do agree, Akanksha. I mean, I think as much as the opportunity is there, it's also a double-edged sword, right? In the sense that we're already seeing signs of going back to business as usual, right? And there is a good reason why SEL hasn't found its identity or due yet, because not because a lot of us are not making noise. We're making a lot of noise, but we aren't making enough noise with true data. Right? India is one country where we don't have a body of knowledge around it. We don't have contextual data around it, basically, right? And nothing opens systems more than data, right? So if we need to keep that noise, basically, we need to start creating more of that body of knowledge. And not, when I say body of knowledge, I don't really mean curriculum and stuff. I mean really data points that actually go and open doors, right? And I think that's really how I think we could use that opportunity.
Point well taken. Yes, we'll take this up later because there is something around assessments that will come up. So yeah, but point taken. Yes, I agree with you.
Awesome. Pratisha, do we want to move on to the next segment of discussion?
Sure, and I think this last bit of the conversation was the perfect segue to it. So thanks, Akansha and Subbu, for bringing it up. Like Akansha mentioned that while it can be treated as an opportunity, and then if you look at it as a fire that had to be like put off, COVID did like somehow like bring SEL needs and children being at home, all those needs at forefront. And since like your work has been at the forefront of sort of working with children and seeing what can be done, there must have been some adaptations to programs that were happening before. And maybe not like, till what extent those adaptations happened, what worked, what did not work. I think that those set of learnings would be very interesting to hear about from each of the panelists. So that's one part of the question. And the second part of the question would be that, right now we're talking about the work that we are doing as different organizations. But did you also see any pivotal or incremental changes in behavior across across the ecosystem? So if you are working with a certain set of stakeholders, did those behaviors change? So I know Subbu just mentioned that there are signs of going back to business, but were there also any kinds of interesting reflections or changes that we saw during this time? So yeah, that's it. And we could start with whoever wants to begin first.
I could go if that's okay. Just will share a slide which captures the response to this question. Please let me know if you're able to see it. Yeah, so this is a second question. I just want to take all of you through to respond to this question through the lens of the interventions that we have been doing. I think from as far back as March 2020, when the first wave hit, and how we responded to what the people we were working with and the communities we were working with were going through. It was a direct response to them, and that's where our programs evolved from over the last year and a half. So just want to take you through all the different kinds of programs we're doing and respond to the question through that lens, including on the stakeholders. So what we have done so for each of our programs, our adolescent programs, our approach has been very different. It is based on the context we are working in, what our partners are looking for, be it a state government or a body like UNICEF, and what we are directly finding out from our stakeholders, the beneficiaries on the ground with respect to what they need. So just to give you an overview, and therefore the objectives have also changed. While the broad mandate is well-being, and it is building social-emotional learning, we have come up with our own granular definition of what we want to see as an outcome for each of these programs and how we are looking at stakeholder involvement as well. So for Sakhi, the adolescent girl project, for instance, it was an offline project, we moved completely online. And because this project works with smaller groups of girls, we were able to raise funds to get them smartphones, and therefore the sessions could continue and we could still bring in more, outside exposure to them. And our eventual, it's a 7-year long project. So we were able to sustain that regular engagement with them, and the parents of these girls have also responded very positively. They're happy with the changes that they're seeing in the girls, especially the first that started. What has really helped is having the anchor person. So for each group of girls, we started in Tamil Nadu in Chennai, but now it's gone to different places. We have an akka or a didi, who is a woman not too older than these girls, so say about 8 to 10 years older, someone in her 20s, but with more exposure, more learning and maturity, who's able to hold space and who's able to build these relationships with the girls. That has really helped us, because otherwise digital reach doesn't really work the same way. So the girls have benefited from that ongoing relationship. And it's a comprehensive intervention in the sense we are working with their academic learning, we're working with social emotional learning, with physical health, with the girls who are growing older, with career choices. So it's a whole range of support that we are giving, with the eventual outcome in view that we would like to help them become change agents, but more importantly for their own lives, have agency over their life choices and become financially reliant and competent themselves. So that's one project. With children in institutional care, like I mentioned, we're working on restoring a sense of self. Here we are engaging with multiple stakeholders. So we've had training sessions with the staff at these shelter homes. So there have been, and we found out through our needs analysis where they stand with respect to well-being, their take on well-being, their understanding, and therefore we could peg it at the right level and brought in experts who are, both psychologists and psychiatrists to bring in the trauma-informed lens so that they get that perspective about how their interactions with children on an ongoing basis can create or destroy that environment, that safe space, a psychological safe space that we want to create through this intervention. And we felt this to be a very, very important piece, because we are having sessions with them, but the sustenance really depends on the staff, right? We meet them for a few hours every day, but the staff is with them day in and out. And what we realized is that they do want to connect with children. They do want to support. In many cases, the staff is at a loss and wanting those inputs. So they responded really well to this intensive training session that we took them through. So that is just a very specific point about a stakeholder involvement. And here what we're doing with children is we're exposing them to art forms as well. So they are learning visual art, they are learning music, and they're going to learn dramatic arts, and they have SEL, which integrates these art forms as well. So what we realized over the course of these 15 years of work is, when a child learns an art form, that in itself becomes a great source of joy and there's a restorative quality, there's a healing quality to learning and practicing arts, which gives them confidence as well. So we're continuing that for these children who don't have access to this kind of training otherwise. Youth with disabilities is where we decided to work through teachers in particular who are special educators. So what we did was we broke down the whole idea of well-being in SEL and said, if we can simply help them engage in these art-based experiences. So often the temptation is to be very ambitious and aspirational, to say, we're going to do this and that, and we're going to build this also and that also. But from our conversations with parents and parents of these children and the teachers who work with them regularly, what we realized was that in the pandemic, it's sort of a big enough, not leap, but a shift if we are able to relieve them of anxiety and just give them some restfulness. Because children with disabilities are particularly misunderstood as well. Parents also struggle to engage them and help them in their learning. So that's why we defined our outcome as saying, can we support them in experiencing joy? And through that, give them some semblance of coping and relief from that anxiety. And that's where we use music and visual art. We're working with a range of disabilities, from intellectual disabilities of multiple kinds, to children with speech and hearing impairment, and visually impaired children as well. For our work with vulnerable youth in rural blocks and in urban slums, so this is a project with the government of Tamil Nadu and UNICEF. We have taken a different approach for both when it comes to, and these are adolescents. What we found out through our needs analysis and interviews is that they really like challenging games. They like engaging with stuff that pushes them a little. We also found that there is a disconnect in terms of the social support structure that was present, because they've been in their homes. So if we thought, why not use something that will help them build these skills as well as bring them together. So in the urban project, we're using a game-based approach. We're creating a game which engages them in different tasks. And through that engagement, it helps them connect with their siblings, with their parents, with the people in their community, the elders, takes them a little out of the space that sort of the pandemic has put everyone in, to reduce that isolation. And through that task and through like a fun, challenging game, also brings the peers together in some ways. So that's the approach for the urban youth. In the rural blocks, which I mentioned earlier, the educationally backward blocks, because we're doing it at a much larger scale, what we're doing is we're creating a workbook, an art-based workbook, which is very visual in nature. So it also addresses challenges in comprehension and reading that some youth may face. And we've layered that with reflective activities. And we're also engaging with teachers who can support this learning. So like Subbu mentioned, teacher well-being as an important outcome unto itself. So we're saying, can we help teachers also work on their own well-being? They have their specific set of challenges through this time. And can we help them understand why this is important, why this connects with the learning process, why and how rather, and give them specific tools that they can use while working with children. And here are outcomes. The objective we identify as, so we've taken from the UNICEF Life Skills Framework, from that the empowerment piece in particular. If you look at the 10 core skills, we're looking at self-awareness and resilience, which we see as immediate needs. So again, this is something we're hoping will continue over years, but to start with, can we help them with these two pieces? And also becoming motivated learners. So because of the big gap and disconnect with the formal learning system that has happened, and children engaging in labor, being pulled in, roped into economic activities by parents, what we foresee is a challenge in bringing them back into the formal system, especially adolescents. And with the learning gap increasing, if I as an adolescent am not able to cope with the gap, it directly hits at my motivation for continuing with that learning. So what we're doing is helping them enjoy the process of learning, bringing in some learning tools and techniques, very, very small, but immediate tips and exposure to understanding their learning styles and ways they can enjoy and become motivated intrinsically to learn. So moving forward, we're doing one program with the SCRT in Tamil Nadu for adolescent girls' mental health, and here we have access to the television network, which has a wider reach. So we've created videos that address challenges that an adolescent girl goes through in particular. So we've been able to customize it highly. Everything from menstrual health to changes their bodies are going through to emotional regulation and all of these. Going to Take It Easy is a project which addresses adolescents all across. So it started last year, where we did the first edition of this was with 6 lakh youth in Tamil Nadu, where we used an IVRS based system. So any adolescent with a regular feature phone, and typically they access their parents' phone, could just call a number and they would get a call back and they would listen to a short story. So we wove a narrative using some characters that stayed with them through those audio stories, the 30-day intervention that we did. And through it, we introduced them to a lot of tools that they could do offline. So everything from journaling to gratitude to gardening to helping parents at home. So there were a whole range of those coping mechanisms and activities which were directed at helping this specific set of students. So the 6 lakh youth that I speak of are those who are in 10th standard. And if you remember last year, I don't know how many of you would know this, but the exams kept getting postponed and there was a lot of uncertainty and anxiety around whether they would happen at all or not. How do I prepare for these exams? So we decided to focus on that specific demographic and bring in those coping skills for uncertainty, anxiety, stress, all of these. And the response was very encouraging. We found that children responded well to being helped with problem-solving abilities, restoration of self-esteem at some level. So as a system, the IVRS mode worked really well. And we also found out the gaps to say that what could be different. What is it that they want more of, or what do they want differently? And riding on the back of those learnings and the responses, we are now in the process of developing the second edition, which we are taking to a larger group. And incidentally, Jharkhand, this group works with adolescents in Jharkhand. So we are on our way to introducing this program to the youth in Jharkhand, 9th to 12th standard grade students. And this is where we also requested inputs at a later stage from your learning on the field about the adolescents in Jharkhand in particular. And we're keeping the format. So we're keeping the storytelling format. We're using IVRS even now. We've tweaked, we are in the process of tweaking the content based on what the adolescents want more of and what we felt we could reduce in terms of scope. An addition here, which we realized, is that the adolescents need some personal connect. I'll come to that a little later, but we are sort of supporting this direct intervention with 10 audio stories for teacher well-being. So we're directly addressing teachers here in supporting their own well-being and also helping the adolescents to build their own social-emotional learning. So that is what we're in the process of developing in Bihar, Jharkhand, as well as Jammu and Kashmir. So these 3 states, Bihar and Jharkhand would be in Hindi. So in Tamil Nadu, we used Tamil as the language. In Bihar and Jharkhand, it would be Hindi, and Jammu and Kashmir would likely be in Urdu. So that's what we're in process of developing, and we're bringing in some cultural context here as well in our stories. Our expressive arts program started a while ago. It's been many, many years, and we are continuing this through our art labs, through our children choirs in different cities, where we are exposing children from vulnerable backgrounds to art training, increasing their exposure and appreciation of the art form, creating platforms for them to perform. So everything from recording albums to performing at concerts and fundraisers. So that is continuing as is except now we're doing it online. We were doing it offline. Now slowly as things are opening up, we're again being able to bring that online exposure in bits and pieces. The teacher empowerment bit is something that we're looking at both as an end unto itself. So teacher well-being support, what Learning Curve Foundation is doing as well, in that their own challenges through this period, as well as how can we help them reconnect with the adolescents through this period from an SEL lens. So that's where we are using teacher workbooks. We're doing workshops with them. We're introducing videos that can support them, and also the audio stories that I spoke of in Take It Easy too. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. I don't know if I've directly answered the questions that were there, but what I wanted to bring in is how we are responding to the adversities that our stakeholders are experiencing. And what we realized, just an additional point that was not on the slide, is when we interacted with parents, they are also struggling their own livelihoods and challenges, of course. So they were very receptive to the inputs that we were giving. And what we've learned from the field is how to curate that and how to peg it at the right level and come in from a space of respect for their experiences, respect for their own understanding and experience of SEL, and being able to connect at that level where we're not coming from a place of, come, let me teach you something, but more of saying, you are dealing and struggling with this. How can we support you in what you're doing so that you can help your children in turn? And this is across age groups from 3 onwards, 3 to 18. So that's just one perspective I wanted to bring in from the adversity lens of how our stakeholders are dealing with the challenges and how we're trying to help them through our interventions as the response. So I will pause now and hand over to Richa and Subbu and Swapna.
Yeah.
Richa, you want to go first, or Swapna, are you going first? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Swapna here from Learning Curve. Yeah, sure. So I'll share my screen. So during the pandemic, everything was like locked, and the schools were shut, and children were at home, and teachers were like struggling at home. We were also like in a mood that there was completely nothing in our heads, like what to do, what actually to be done. So we were also thinking for 1 month, as Subbu said, we waited for a month, and then we thought that firstly we should actually get some ground information from the teachers. Then we planned for a survey so that to understand the ground realities, field realities very well, and then we can actually start an intervention where we can actually reach students, teachers, parents and all. For that, we did a research with around 300 teachers, with both private sector and government sector teachers. We actually work with the low budget private schools and also KGBVs, as we all know that Kasturba Gandhi Vidyalayas. We work with during those days, we used to work with 18 KGBVs of Vikarabad district. So with the whole bunch of teachers, we did a survey where teachers reported that yes, teachers are also not able to manage their emotions, and they need a support. They need a sort of support from the ground, from the government or from anybody. They need a support. And also they mentioned that even the children are facing the same issues, like they are not able to share their personal feelings, emotions with anyone, and they are facing a lot of issues during that particular period and time. And also they said that it's very difficult for all the things for everyone to manage. That's what we understood from the teachers from the ground. Based on this, we actually started thinking, how can we actually provide a support to all these stakeholders and which can happen at home. Because our program model was that teachers used to implement our program in schools. Okay, for children, whatever SEL program we are doing, that was implemented by teachers through schools as a platform. But now the schools are not there and the children are at home. So then we thought, why shouldn't we take SEL to home? As teachers were implementing, now parents will support us in implementing the program. And then we started our Connected Home. Our team designed a program called Connected Home, where we introduced 7 toolkits. which were built on resilience, building resilience, self-management, coping up with stress, managing themselves better, like social awareness, and lot of SEL skills were embedded in these books. So these 7 toolkits were built during a very minimum time, and we also translated it into the local language, because we are working with the government schools where most of the schools, all the schools are like in Telugu medium, so they need it in local language. And these, each book consists of 35 activities of almost all are like very simpler language, so that because keeping the parents in mind, we actually designed it, because the schools where we are working are like, we have some aspirational districts, we have some children, schools which are like in very rural areas, and we can't expect a parent to sit, read, and support their children. It is written in such a simpler language, even if a 6th grade child can read that book, understand, and both the parents can sit and work out these activities. So to make a parent and to build that relationship stronger during the COVID time, we built these activities. And yeah, why can't a learning happen at home? We all know that our first school was home. So definitely parents teach us a lot of things. So we took SEL to home. During the month of June, we started this implementation, when actually the school should reopen, but this did not happen. Schools did not reopen. So we took this to the home. And the implementation model, as we all know that nobody were aware or used to the online structure in these schools, in government schools especially. Even teachers were not aware, and teachers were like, even if we send something on phones, they won't open, they won't see, because it's like everybody used to see the books, do the learning, take the sessions, take the classes and all. That was actually happening. That was the structure. So we did different models. We used different models to do this implementation. Initially, we faced a lot of issues, a lot of challenges in taking this to the school, even to the school, though teachers know that this is something which is important, but children do not have access to phones because parents go for work. Still, if parents are at home, but they may have or may not have net and all. Yeah. So that was the issue. They may have smartphones or not, or maybe they can have only one phone at home, or maybe some children are like orphans, they stay in hostels and all. So there were a lot of issues, and we initially we did not collect any student contacts and all. We were directly working with the schools. Then we thought a different model where we can actually take this to the parents, where we can actually reach out parents directly and make them understand what they have to do, how can they teach. Yeah. So when we implemented this for 1 month in Vikarabad district, we actually distributed the books with the help of the teachers. We actually distributed 3,000 books to the students. Even during the pandemic, when schools were not there, teachers supported us. We actually printed and we sent to each and every 18 schools. We sent to all the schools, where teachers call the child, or in some schools they call their parents, and they handed over the book to the teachers. We actually sent 3 connected home toolkits, and the distribution was like happened. Each and every child got the book, and the children started doing the activities. Then after this, when the children started doing the activities, teachers actually noticed a bit of improvement in the children. They saw that children were also, even at that time, government started their PSAT programs, they started their sessions, lessons and all. So both of them were like simultaneously, our activities and the government activities started. Then teachers started noticing that children are actively participating, showing interest in doing learning curves, connected home activities, and even parents are also focusing on this. And we collected around 2,000 contacts from Vikarabad, especially from Vikarabad, and we reached out to each and every parent directly through our phone calls. So our parent engagement was like directly. We reached out to each and every parent through phones. We spent around 15 to 20 minutes in the initial days to explain them why actually SEL is important. Why as a parent you have to sit with your child and explain them about these things. Why there is a need during this situation, and even before, why can you see a need? Actually, we explained in that way that parents should actually notice I should actually sit with my child, give some time to my child, and improve these skills in my child. So that was actually the conversation happened with the parent. And we also thought of IVRS, where we initially sent to all the 2,000 parents, we sent the IVRS. It was like a 30-second audio, but we did not give it to the externals to record it because we thought that it should be like our voice, because we are talking with the parents. They should actually notice our voice so that the importance comes to them and they listen to the audio. And it should be like a local person talking with them. It's not some external talking with the parent. So our team, we learned how to record in that 30 seconds, and we actually started recording and we shared those audios with the parents. And initially the pickup rate was not good, has the same issues, network, phone and all. Later when we started our conversations, talking with them directly and said them, this is the time slot where you will get a call from Learning Curve. So just pick up and listen to that call. Then it was like all the parents, around 1,800 was the pickup rate in the coming days. It was like it just picked up and we reached out to 18 out of 2,000, 1,800 parents used to pick up our call and listen to the audios. And whenever we call them, they used to like, yes, you are from Learning, we understood, and we listened to your audios. And they used to tell me which audio actually they like. That was the response we used to get from the parents. So that connect we made with all those parents. And yeah, for the teachers, as we teachers are the middle people who actually connected us to the children and to the parents. And so we did not lose that connect with the teachers. During those times, we did our 3 webinars. Every month, we did our 3 teacher developmental workshops. So it's not a physical one, so we call it as webinars. We did those webinars with the teachers, and in each and every webinar, it was like 100% attendance we used to get from the teachers. So they were like very much interested to join the Learning Curve webinars, which were like a good learning, activity based, and it's like one-on-one conversations used to happen with every teacher. So that was the implementation model we used during that period. And in the month of September, it's just the we started the implementation in 2 to 3 months. When we reported to the government and when we reached them, they said that we understood the importance of the program, and yes, we feel that they should go forward. And during the pandemic, they actually gave us 10 more districts to implement the same program. Then we started that program in the month of November. So that's the model we did during the COVID, and it's still continuing. In the 11 districts of Telangana, we are still continuing the same program. So last year, we actually provided online support to few districts. As in middle of year, we got 10 more districts. For 5 districts, we actually gave the physical toolkit. We sent them to the schools, and the implementation model was children directly, they used to do the activities in the books. And every week we used to send 2 activities through the WhatsApp groups which we had. And by looking the page, they used to do it in the notebooks. The books whichever we gave to them, they used to work on those books. And other 5 districts we actually sent online. It's just to understand how it works. If we give the books, how does the model looks like, how the implementation happens, and how the children learning happens. And if we won't give the books, how does it make difference? So just to understand that, we use both the models in the ground level. And yes, here if you could see the pic in the last pic, it's just done by the child. It's even though we gave the book, they did everything in their own notebooks. That's the difference. So children, even the implementation was like equal. The learning was like equal, though the book was given in 5 districts, and where the book was not given in the other 5 districts, it was like a similar one. We got the same responses from the children. The same learning happened. They remember every page, every activity. It was there like in their mind. Even though the book was there, they started doing because they loved the book colors, they loved the activities, they were very much interested in it, so they did. So we felt that, yeah, this worked. This is something where they were looking, even the teachers, we heard from teachers, parents, even as I said, we heard the same from the government. That's why they actually added a few more districts. That was our implementation during the COVID. Yes. Yeah, Richa. Thank you.
Thank you, Swapna. That's amazing, and it was heartwarming to hear all the stories. So thank you for sharing that. I can quickly share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So I think thank you, Swapna, for sharing that, and I'm just really happy to hear all the work that you did. So I'm trying to center myself, but essentially at Labhya, some of our learnings I'll be talking about, and some of the adaptations that we made. I think there were 4 core principles that we followed, and in hindsight, when we look at it, helped us understand what our learnings even were and what our children needed and what we needed to do. The first one was team before program. So when the lockdown happened, we were in the process of expanding our team, having more people coming in. And I think at that point, it was important for us to prioritize the people that we work with before any kind of program. So actually, when the lockdown was announced, we completely shut down for 2.5 weeks, just so that everyone could settle in to the new reality or whatever they felt like doing. They had the space to do that. When we came back, interestingly, a lot of the ideas that we ended up implementing during the pandemic was when everyone had sort of time to think about it and understood what worked for us as individuals, and therefore what could have worked for our teachers and our children. The second was children and young people first before any kind of scale strategy or any kind of implementation strategy. That was super important for us, and that led us to partnering with a lot of people, that led us to understanding what our children truly needed and deep diving into what we could do with them and for them. And how to keep their needs at the center. So usually when we start working with the government, we do a need analysis, we talk to the teachers, we do a need analysis with the teachers. But this time this is the most amount of first-hand research we've done with different demographics of young people and children. We did multiple rounds of focus groups. We did multiple rounds of understanding their needs, verbally, non-verbally, just observing them in our environments. And I think that really helped us go deeper into what we were trying to do and the why of it. The third was context and sustainability first, and this goes to Subbu's point initially. Subbu, you mentioned that it's a great wave. Everyone's talking about SEL right now, and then जब school खुल जाएंगे तो वापस सब numeracy literacy ये वो teacher capacity building इस सब में चले जाएंगे, which is something that we wanted to be wary of. So actually, every person apart from the government, which is a long-term partnership we have, and with the government, our strategy was mostly to make sure our teachers were in a safe space, make sure our children were in a safe space, however possible. Can we reach them? Can they access social emotional learning through various media? And can we also prepare school environments in general to be ready to come, for children to come back to school? या ऐसा ना हो कि हम 1.5 साल के बाद school खोलें. We, get schools opened up after a year and a half, especially in urban cities, and then we start finishing our syllabus, right? Which would basically reverse pretty much everything that we had envisioned. So that was our focus on how to create programming, how to understand what the system needs, and how to provide what the system needs, so that when schools open, children have a space to adjust to this humongous amount of change that has happened in their lives in the past year and a half. For our nonprofit and multilateral partners, we understood that if we don't set context and set boundaries for sustainability, what might happen is we will create amazing programs in the pandemic year, and we will get lots of funding for it, but nothing will happen after that. And so what we did was we did phase programs. So we promised the organizations and the multilaterals we worked with that we are doing this program on well-being. We are doing this program with young people. We're capacitating your people to recognize psychosocial needs and well-being needs of children and how to respond to it as a community. But we are also looking at a phase 2, which is how to integrate social emotional learning and well-being in your programs in the long run. And how can we look at long-term partnerships, even if this is one of the most uncertain years that we all will face as organizations. And that was really the driving force of all the partnerships that we did. An example of this is we worked with Breakthrough to integrate social emotional learning into their curriculum. We trained their ground first people in understanding how you can understand the needs of young people psychosocially and provide community and peer support. And we went on to also integrate social emotional learning concretely in their flagship program, which was Taru Ki Toli. Similarly, we worked with Head Held High Foundation and UNDP to do a program on soft skills and social emotional learning for young people. And interestingly, the data that came back from the program, it was also part of a larger program that was on career guidance. And what we found out was that 80% young people that we had worked with, and we worked with about 100,000 young people in that program, they wanted to know more and learn more and work more on social and emotional skills. They wanted to know, how can I build strong relationships? How can I become more resilient? How do I feel, and how can I regulate my feelings in such environments where I don't even know what's the next day going to look like? And that data helped us inform a more long-term program that we are now doing with both the partners, which is a 2-year program on integrating social emotional learning across 3 districts of Karnataka. And there are several examples of how we did this with several different kinds of organizations, but it really helped us also understand our own value system in a crisis as an organization. And the power of partnerships, definitely. Apart from our government programs, we were able to directly work with 600,000 young people through these organizations. We were able to capacitate and work with deeply staff members, program team members, senior leadership members, and people who are ground first to implement these programs at scale, to recognize the needs of young people and co-create the program with us. And that has been one of our strongest methodologies and learnings, that we don't create programs in isolation. We work with the people that we are going to work with to understand their needs, and also co-create programs with them. Any kind of curriculum, any teacher training, evaluation, everything is done alongside with them. Which led to scale without thinking of scale. Of course, at Labhya, scale is important, and it is the core of what we do. We understand that it's important for more and more young people to access social emotional learning, more and more children to access social emotional learning at quality. And what this led to was a lot of data, which led to scale. So the UNDP project led to immense, one of the first reports that UNDP may have even mentioned social emotional learning skills at such a depth, and how it informed their future programs, how it's part of table conversations now. We worked with UNICEF for a program with young care leavers on social emotional learning with Udyan Care. and a bunch of different partners. And I think even working with the government, all the teacher capacity building data included well-being, even if the training was not about social emotional learning explicitly. And I think that led to a larger understanding and buy-in into the program, not just for now when it's really cool to talk about it, but also in the future, because they have promised and we have promised to initiate and start working with them in the long term. And of course, lastly, knowing our proposition as an organization and as a team was super important. It really helped us adapt to what was happening around us and respond to the needs of young people. Lastly, I think one of our biggest learnings have been that our strength is our proximity to the problem. We built our team, especially our program team, during COVID. And of course, our co-founders and the entire team almost at Labhya comes from a space where we all have faced emotional and mental health related adversity as children. And that was also intersectional with socioeconomic issues and several other issues. And what became our strength during this time was that we were not creating for anybody. We were creating for ourselves. We could understand the needs, of course, of diverse populations, but the curriculum was not being built by just anyone. It was being built by a person of the same age who has gone through the same issues. And those team members are present in this call today, Ashna, Iqbal, Kunal. And I think that became our biggest strength, even not only in program design, but also the way we approached the entire partnerships piece and how we worked during the pandemic. So I'll pause here and hand it over to anyone who wants to speak.
Thanks, everyone. I think it was really nice to hear from all of you. And very interesting that there were a lot of common things which also came up, like even though the geographies were sort of different and the people you were working were different, even then, things like activity books, IVRS, these things were coming up as tools which were being used. It was like extremely heartening to hear how government officials and teachers and parents whom we usually think might not be extremely supportive of measures, they were being very receptive, and it breaks certain stereotypes that we have. And even at Sampurna, I think that was like one of our reflections also, that there has been like engagement which is beyond just responsive, but also like Swapna was talking about that, they are identifying the need themselves and also taking that sort of initiative. So I think that's really interesting to hear from everybody. And I'm sure some people might have questions on the same, on a lot of these things. But in the interest of time, maybe we can go to the next section and then we can just have like a combined Q&A towards the end. Hope that's okay. Great. So in that case, I think assessments was something that came up right from the first Menti we shared. And then, like you all understand, it can be a slippery slope in many contexts. So I think it would be interesting to hear if we have any insights on it, tool-based insights, and what are the needs of having an assessment program, some challenges. So that would be interesting to hear. Again, we can start with anyone who wants to begin first.
Akanksha, would you like to go first and lead the way so that we can then follow your
You should be talking about assessments, so we all want to hear from you. No, I can do that.
I will obviously talk about assessments, no doubt about that. But
I can do that.
Since you meticulously, prepared slides and all of that, please.
So, Swapna, do you want to start first? I think since you already shared screen.
Shall I or yeah, no.
Swapna, maybe you stop your share, right? I'll let Akanksha go first.
Either way is okay.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Akanksha.
Okay, all right. So this is the final question that you had asked about implementation learnings. We just synthesized it into some key pointers. What we realized using technology is that while it helps us reach children who are at home, each mode of technology has a very specific limitation. And it is very difficult to solve for all those challenges. So we sort of need to pick and prioritize. Somewhere there's a balance to draw. There is no perfect solution. Obviously, we would all have realized this from our experience, but just to give you a sense of the challenges we have encountered, overall, with respect to tech, digital divide is a big challenge because not all children have access to phones, let alone smartphones. They only get it when parents are home, if it's a parent phone. So then, and these are often at odd hours after parents return from work. In some of our programs, like I mentioned, there's an absence of personal connect. If it's an IVRS-based program, there is the human interaction is missing, and at scale, it is challenging to provide that for them to talk back to a human being who they connect with, which we're trying to solve for now, but it is the challenge we've encountered. In some cases where we used WhatsApp for sharing videos, children not having connectivity, bandwidth, data, like they need to recharge. So then they've not been able to download those videos because of these challenges. Device availability, I've already shared. IVRS specifically as a technology, you can hear it once. You can't revise it as such after that day's content has been relayed. So we are again solving for this in Take It Easy 2 by keeping a day for revising the week's themes, so that at the end of the week, children have a chance to go back to those things. But in the first edition, this is what we realized. You can't pause or rewind. So if you miss it, you miss it. You just make another call and hear it again the same day, right? WhatsApp, I already mentioned. So on the whole, that's the tech sort of piece. And we're still figuring as we're going along. What we have done over the last year and a half, so our work is with disadvantaged children and youth, but through the pandemic, we have focused on the most vulnerable of these youth, because the pandemic has hit them harder than other disadvantaged children. So where, Richa, you mentioned intersectionality, right? Wherever these, economic and social and caste and religious and all of these factors sort of intersect is where gender even is where we realize that we need to intervene, sort of it's become an emergency to intervene and help. And we want to handhold and support them while these youth come back to a little level of normalcy with respect to their lives and reconnect with formal systems. So that's where I had the first slide where I mentioned where all we are working, that highlights that in greater detail. One learning in youth with disabilities, I already mentioned that we started by saying, let's design for the youth, let's design sessions integrating art for these children and work with teachers or special educators to deliver them. But what we realized is, while working with them, we realized that the best we can do is to empower the teachers themselves and let them and inspire them enough to want to use art and to want to focus on well-being. So with youth with disabilities in particular, often it is integrated learning. When you look at intellectual disabilities and so on, there is, you have to look at the whole child in any case. But specific tools and techniques from the world of art is what we were able to bring to them. And that itself we found to be a very useful objective through the training program. And it really worked, and that now it's in their hands to take it forward. Including working on their understanding of holistic well-being and how their everyday interaction can be enriched through that learning. The third key learning is the adaptation rather, is what we've done is the way we define and identify data, the way we collect data, the way we measure or assess our outcomes. We have moved away. So we have been using quantitative methods. Of course, even now, our large-scale interventions do have baseline, endline. But what we're increasingly doing is we're evolving our own tools from the field understanding. From what we're understanding is that many of the Western constructs don't fully apply to the most vulnerable segments in India. And the standardized tools have great limitations in helping us capture the bigger picture of what is working and what is not. So one such adaptation, for instance, since NalandaWay is driven by art-based and art-integrated approaches, is we are using art itself as a way to assess impact. So there is a specific method in it called creative elicitation, where we are using creative ways. So these are qualitative measures. So we use art to elicit responses from children, and then we do a rigorous thematic analysis to arrive at our understanding of what has worked, what has not, where the children are. So some specifics of where we found these limitations. One is that the normative scores that are given, the parameters that are applicable to the Western world are not necessarily applicable. So it's very difficult to even compare data, therefore, like for like in the specific communities we are working in. Low levels of literacy and comprehension challenges mean that children can't access these tools. And even if we translate it to another language, there is an extensive process of validation that you go through. And even after translation, it doesn't really correlate to the way the constructs are defined in the frameworks that we've looked at. And therefore, we end up getting inaccurate data. There is a lot of social desirability here also, where children want to respond in a way that comes across as ideal. Self-administration is difficult because we're using self-assessment questionnaires, and when we leave it to the hands of the youth to assess themselves, it becomes very challenging for them. And we cannot have an adult intervening because that contaminates the data. And children and youth are finding it hard to understand the word. So in many of these cases, we have evolved our own tools, which we have found give us a far greater understanding of both their context and also the effectiveness of our interventions. And literacy, of course, remains a challenge because when you're trying to comprehend words, so we've tried to also use visual ways of assessing, and we have a whole range of qualitative tools which complement but also expand on our quantitative understanding to help us bring nuance into how we're doing our program, right? From the way we're defining the outcomes to the design and what we are really assessing about what has worked, what has not. There are cultural variations and geographic variations of the concepts themselves, right? Like when you look at gratitude, when you look at kindness, the way we understand gratitude and kindness in India, for instance, I'll give you a specific example. In Chennai, lower income groups, when you talk about kindness or gratitude being, saying thank you, we are not a very highly verbalized society, So if I assess saying whether children or youth are using the word thank you to really express gratitude, and if they don't, they've not got gratitude, we're really missing the point of how gratitude is shown in an Indian culture. In our culture, gratitude can be shown by doing something for someone as well. How do you capture that quantitatively, right? And parents themselves have a certain understanding which is very culturally rooted for concepts such as kindness and gratitude, and these are often interlinked. So to have those sort of bucketed, siloed concepts and then assessing those were not really working for us. So we've gone totally to the ground, and we've gone ground up and said, can we capture this the way the culture understands it and the way they define it? And go beyond the limitations of both Western standardized tools and quantitative measures as well. And the early results from something like creative elicitation are also very encouraging because we are getting a lot of rich data. So yeah, the quantitative tools are incomplete. They're needed in case of large scale interventions, yes. And like Subbu said, for funding, you have to show certain quantitative data as well, but we find that they are not, by no way are they comprehensive. So we're increasingly relying on our qualitative methods as well, and we're evolving them in-house. Our project design and outcomes themselves are contextualized to where we are working. So for instance, if I take self-awareness as it means for a child living in a slum in Chennai is different from self-awareness for a child who's in a shelter home in, say, Coimbatore, or even in Chennai for that matter, because their background, their context, their everyday life is so different where they are with respect to self-awareness. There is a whole continuum. Apart from having diverse concepts within self-awareness, there is also a continuum to where children are. And often when you have a traumatic background, the first place of disconnect is with your body. So bringing children back to their bodies, helping them get comfortable and aware about their own bodies, cultivating attentiveness towards their own bodies is a starting point in many of these cases. So we are breaking these constructs that we take from psychology in the field of SEL and well-being, and we are saying, can we take exactly what the population needs at this point in time, what will help them right now, instead of coming in with our own ideas of what they ought to learn and what they ought not to learn. So we're just helping them, we're meeting them where they are, basically. Another I'm missing one example that I wanted to give, but I'll come back to it. So they inform the concept, the design, the implementation, and the impact assessment. The developmental stage and needs, of course, also play a huge role. And cultural context, like I mentioned, not just where the children are residing, but also which community they are a part of, which state. And because we are working in multiple states, we are realizing that what will work with children, for instance, in Tamil Nadu may not necessarily work with children in Noida, where also we have our projects running. Likewise for youth. And these are some of the examples where developmentally younger children work better with stories. So we are using stories directly, relying entirely on that. And parents are finding it very helpful because they also like narrating stories. So these stories are helping the parents sort of drive these outcomes for children, help their well-being as well. I already mentioned the game-based intervention and art-based intervention, where we are finding there are literacy and comprehension challenges. We are making resources as visual as we can and very accessible to different learning levels, to learning styles, as well as literate and non-literate population. In many of our interventions, we're also making it amenable to parents being able to use it, understand, even if they are not literate. So that is our next learning and adaptation. Like Richa mentioned, our partnerships have also expanded because we realize we cannot be everywhere. It is not even desirable or ideal to be everywhere, and people are doing great work. Just like all the people who are mentioned, who are present here, not just on the panel, but all those who are attending, and we know of all your work on the field, we're joining hands and saying, where can we complement what you are already doing? And in most cases, we're going in with a specific expertise in using art-based methods because we've evolved this over these years and are very rigorous about where we come from, both in implementing and in assessing outcomes where art is the modality, primary modality. And we have a lot of research backing on that, as well as our work in emotional well-being and mental health. So we typically go in as knowledge partners and just have mentioned two examples, like the Youth with Disabilities project is currently happening through Tech Mahindra Foundation, which has a project called Arise Plus in these schools. We were partnering with Kevali Education Foundation, which is also here, I think, where their district transformation program was based on C-learning framework by Emory University. And what we did was to bring in art-based activities that were mapped to the C-learning framework for them to implement on the field. So we created those resources together with their team. And there are many such partnerships that we've engaged in for other age groups. These are specifically for adolescents that I'm bringing in. Lastly, our projects, what we are doing, and this came up in the question somewhere about governments recognizing learning gap or academic learning as the most important gap right now. And how do you bring in SEL here? One way we found here in Tamil Nadu with the SCRT is we recognize that bridging the academic learning gap is top of mind, especially for the educationally backward blocks. And therefore what we have done is we have taken that priority and bringing in our lens, we've said, can we work on learner motivation, right? And using art. So what we've done is we've brought in sort of, cutting edge ideas and frameworks that are usually accessible only to the English speaking digitized world, something like growth mindset or learning to learn, metacognition, all of this. We're using that, helping children get into a state of flow, for instance, and we're bringing that and we're layering that with SEL. So we're saying, can the same workbook help the adolescent both work on their well-being through practices, habits, behaviors, resources, even knowledge for that matter? We're bringing in research-based scientific knowledge that is devoid of any cultural connotation, because cultural connotations vary hugely when it comes to adolescents and all the experiences around the adolescent mind, body, and emotions. And we want to sort of steer clear and give that space for the community to contextualize it instead. So from our end, we are saying, can we make it scientific and just empower the adolescents? And the more you recognize about this developmental stage, the better off you are in learning to deal with it. So everything from your brain to your bodies to your emotions and your psychosocial development, you're bringing that in. We're keeping the government's priorities in mind at all times. And that is really helping work together as partners. So the handbook that I mentioned for teachers, for instance, also brings in both components. And here the government is also keen on SCRT very strongly recognizes teacher well-being as a challenge. because they get that direct feedback from through their bodies and teachers on how much the teachers are struggling being disconnected from children and being at home, and the balance that you mentioned, Richa, about home and work all blending, and a loss of sense of purpose and identity is what we found out directly when we spoke to teachers, that if I'm not in the school, who am I really? If I'm not teaching, who am I as a teacher, and what role am I playing in their lives? And typically the work of teacher thrives on that energy and that feedback you get from children being in the same class with you. So their well-being has also been affected, and that's recognized by the government. So we are creating those resources, and we are also bringing in the element of equipping teachers for the longer run, that once schools reopen, and in many places they are, can the teachers start bringing in practices into the classroom? So embedding these practices into the classroom that will help them support the adolescents' well-being. And this includes everything from understanding adolescence as a developmental age and stage, what to recognize, what to expect, and normalizing some of those struggles and conflicts that the teachers get into and end up spending a lot of energy on. And bringing in the SEL perspective, saying here's how, even if you're a subject teacher, here's how you can navigate that class with the child, and framework becomes a part of it, but a lot of it is tactical also, right? Like the teacher says, okay, I know this, but how do I do it? So we're bringing those concrete tools and resources customized to the population that we're working in. So that's sort of our last learning. Sriram, if I'm missing anything, please add. I think I've tried to cover as much as we can in the time. So I'll just stop sharing at this point. Yes, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Akanksha. You've completed. I mean, you've said it all.
I have. Thanks.
Then maybe we can move on to Richa and then followed by Subhu.
Sounds good. Just, I know that I'm being also aware of the time, so I'll keep this super short, but I know that this is something that we all love to talk about. So happy to have a conversation offline after this, wherever possible. So I think assessments for the work that we do has definitely been a challenge for us, specifically because we work at scale and with government machinery. So it was never as easy as, oh, let's contextualize this tool for children and then do it in like 1,000 schools. Great, we have all this data, that's the baseline. And it was never going to be that kind of a road for us. So in our experience of working with 3 governments, about, I think, 2.4 million children now, is that we needed to focus more on what the ecosystem needed in terms of data, and then also understand what we wanted to assess amongst children. And our biggest learning was, how are we even assessing the effectiveness of our program delivery? Because social emotional learning, integrating it into a government system in itself is a huge mindset shift. It's not just about introducing a content handbook to the teachers, training the teachers and telling them, oh, now you have a 30-minute, class mandated, go and do it effectively. It's also about how school inspectors look at a happiness or an Anandam or an SEL class when they walk into the school and they realize, is class mein to shor mach raha hai. In this class, lots of shouting and yelling is happening, or group work is happening. It's not disciplined, right? Or the teacher not feeling like they're doing good enough if not all children are participating in a mindfulness class. So our perspective towards monitoring and evaluation, for the lack of a better word, or assessment, is to understand how we can perfect the program delivery of whatever we do at scale, basically. And so what we do is we ensure that right from the times we start touching our master trainers' lives, we do a boot camp with them to understand how we can define SEL together for the state, till the time they create contextual, localized curriculum for the children. And once we start working with the teachers, how can we understand what language we are going to use when we define this program? How can we understand whose need is getting addressed through the curriculum or through the program, and how can the essence of the curriculum also flow through the system itself? If we are training or capacitating the teachers mandatorily, they don't want to sit there, and in the training we are saying give children choice, that's not going to work. So all of these things we focused a lot on while monitoring the program. How can we make sure there's more and more agency? How do we understand and measure the amount of agency teachers have in the system while they are sitting in our workshops? How do our master trainers feel before and after the workshops that they do with us? Do they feel comfortable creating content? What kind of content do they want to create, and how can they assess the quality of the content themselves? So we looked at data in a more dynamic way in that sense, and helped us transform what we approach program delivery to be. Coming to the second point, and then I'll close after this, is student assessment. So obviously we do all this beautiful work in the system, but we want to see a shift happening in how children start to believe in their true potential. So over the past year and a half, we have been working with experts from Harvard, some of my professors from there, and people who have a deep-rooted understanding of children in public schools in India, to develop a holistic way to understand how we can capture some of this data, some of these insights from our classrooms directly from the students, and making sure that all the constraints that Akanksha spoke about are accounted for, and how can we make sure that it's holistic as possible, plus making sure that all the data we actually capture is actually going somewhere. So if we have understood that children have our 3 key outcomes, which is resilience, relationship skills, and learning motivation, and they've grown in that, how does it matter? What is it going to lead to? And what are the larger tangible outcomes in the long term that this will lead to, are some of the questions that we have tried to answer in the framework that we are creating. And in fact, in a month or two, we will be launching our baseline in Tripura, which is our newest state partnership, to see what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully bring this to other states that we work with and other partners who would like to work with us on it. Thank you. I'll pause here. Over to Swapna and Subbu.
Swapna, can I take this one? Should I take this one? Very quickly. I'm sorry, I think we've got about 6 minutes.
Yeah, we're running a little late, so we'll have to.
So I will do this in a minute, and then if anybody wants to sort of go for it, right? Very quickly, our investment in assessment started on day one when we started, simply because we wanted to know what's working, what's not working, how do we even know it's working? And since then, basically, we've invested very significantly in looking at assessment from both a quantitative and qualitative lens, making sure that we are able to capture perspectives from multiple stakeholders. So when we look at for example, student, it's not just the student who undertakes a self-reported sort of questionnaire. It's also the teacher who gives observation data. It's also the parent who gives us data. So you have multiple ways to look at the same aspect. Even, for example, for things like when we look at a student self-reported questionnaire, basically the questionnaire does not have statements that say how the student can potentially respond, right? Basically, they're very situational, they're very visual. And in the back end is when they're mapped, where they're actually mapped to a set of indicators that tell us basically where the student is at and how much support is actually required. We don't grade assessments. We sort of have in more of saying basically making progress, need support, stuff like that, right? So basically that's how it is done. So over the last 4 years, 5 years, we built out these assessment tools for teacher SEL, student SEL, school well-being, etc. So we've done it from multiple different perspectives. We worked with experts both globally and also from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, got it validated on the ground, done all of that sort of work. So yeah, that's really our little 2 cents about assessment. I think you can't just use one tool and hope it all works. You've got to use multiple ways to look at it. You've got to look at outcome and process, and that's really what we've been sort of up to. And during the pandemic, we used some of these tools, but largely we had to tweak. We had to use a few more qualitative instruments. We used semi-structured interviews with parents, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm just going to pause there. Anybody who wants to sort of learn more, please do reach out to me, Swapna, Akhila. We're all there to answer your questions. So that's my time.
Great. Thanks everyone for your inputs on this. So since we have just 4 minutes as per the schedule time, I would just open the floor to any questions. And let the participants ask either on chat, or you can just unmute and speak if you have any questions for the participants. Across the different sections they have spoken about. So they talked about SEL, in a more overall landscape point of view. Then they spoke about SEL from an adversity lens, and then about programs in the sense. So about any of these, if you have any questions, yeah, now is the time.
Hi everyone. Pratishtha, I've just put my question in the chat box. I'll just repeat. Thanks for that lovely presentation. I joined late, but I thoroughly enjoyed. And my question is based on the last bit that all of you presented in terms of assessments. So have any one of you kind of tried to and triangulation as one of the main ways of kind of finding from different stakeholders about the learner? There are so many standardized tools in the West. Like in India, do we have, and if any one of you has worked on developing, say, SEL well-being index or an index or a scale to understand vulnerability for children? Basically, because in India, we have caste, class, gender, and many other factors that kind of intersect to look at vulnerability apart from child's own day-to-day experiences. So if any work in that direction has been done by any one of you, just wanted to know and understand more.
I think I can quickly take that, or if anyone has something burning to. Awesome. So two things, Deepika, thank you for your question. I think number one, the framework that we use for our programs with governments of Delhi, Uttarakhand, and now Tripura are very extremely deeply rooted in the reality of our children. And I hear you when you say that lots of frameworks, indexes, everything is basically based in the West or Australia, New Zealand, etc., where of course a lot of cutting edge work is happening, but it's not in our context. Our framework is freely available. It's grade specific, it's age specific, and we have state-specific frameworks also freely available on the government's website. So happy to connect with you, and we can share it with you. You can search for it on the Delhi government, Uttarakhand government websites. I think that could be a great starting point. And secondly, in 2019, we worked with the ASER team to introduce a small part of the ASER survey that year in 2019 was on social emotional learning, which was for children of ages 4 to 8. So that tool, which is of course publicly available as well, was also created with a deep focus on what our children need and what their context is. So happy to share that as well. I think that was something, and that data itself was also pretty insightful in the year.
Richard, just a quick follow. Would these be on even your website, Labhya's website? Yeah, cool. Then it will be easier to search for them. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
In our work, also what we have done is we have adapted standardized tools. So there are many standardized tools for specific constructs. Some tools have, they measure a lot of different constructs under life skills, under SEL. We pick and choose based on what we have identified, and we adapt it to the population that we are working with. So you wouldn't find it to be the exact definition, which is where I also said that a lot of standardized validated tools are not always working in our interventions. And we are triangulating for almost all our projects. There are inputs from multiple stakeholders. So if there is a child who's answering a few questions on self-assessment measure, at the same time, there is a teacher who is giving an input either through interviews or FGDs or observation charts. We use a whole bunch of things. We're talking to parents as well for the same child. So just much like what Subbu mentioned, one data point does not capture it. It has to be triangulated. So we're doing that for different projects. Yeah, just to answer it in short. Thanks for the link, Richa.
Thanks for the link, Richa. Any other questions that we have from the panelists?
I will also have to drop off in a few minutes for another call, but let's take 5-7 minutes if anyone has a question. Subbu, you're on mute.
Pratishtha, I have. Hello. Am I audible, Pratishtha?
Yes, Akash, we can hear you. Yes, please go.
Hey, hi, myself Akash from the Sampurna team. Just one question to the panelists. as Subbu was mentioning, things might return to business as usual, and therefore, how do we sort of integrate ACL into the definition of business as usual? Is something I am just looking forward. And any thoughts from all of you on how do we sort of? I'm sure there is a journey, but what's next from here, right? Um, while schools are opening up, when things would normalize, how do we then sort of make ACL as business as usual and not only academic learning, cognitive achievements, etc.? Any thoughts from your side?
I think that's a serious mindset shift sort of question. Um, and honestly, I don't think any of us here have the answer to that. To be honest, if I think it's about how consistently, I think to my mind at least, right? It's about how consistently we can generate credible data, credible evidence of SEL being useful, not our own programs being effective. There's a fundamental difference between the two. If we start generating evidence around SEL, the need for SEL, and how SEL is working, then I think we have a way. That is exactly what Asar did for literacy and numeracy over a period of 20 years. If we go into, when we go to government, basically what do we tend to say? We say, ये हमारा program है, ये हमारा data है, हमको 10 district में और काम करना है, हमको scale करना है. When we stop doing that, and when we basically say, ये SEL का फायदा है, and then we go to governments with that, it'll make sense. It'll start making sense. Might still take the next 20 years, but it might start to make sense. I think that's my 2 cents on it.
Richa, Kansha, any thoughts on it?
To add to what Subbu said, I totally agree. I think that data, field level data, I think is what will really help. What I see as a sustenance of this is exactly the point that came up earlier also, to integrate it with academic learning and to clearly establish the correlation between two wherever we are already working. So if there is a risk of those projects discontinuing after schools resume, then we are able to ride on the back of this data that we gather right now to say that when you work on well-being in SEL, you see an improvement in academic learning, in attendance levels, reduction in dropout rates. We're able to correlate that in some ways. So we're also trying to do that. Second thing is to embed it into the system. So for instance, the teachers that we're working with in rural Tamil Nadu, we are looking at a long-term lens to say, can we convert them to SEL, to SEL and well-being, and just firmly establish how critical this is. Our hope is that they will take it with them to the generations of learners they work with. So that is the embedding at an individual level, but at a systemic level, I think that kind of advocacy that Subbu is talking is going to be important for this to get funded, prioritized, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, quick +1 to what both Subbu and Akanksha said. I think for anything to become sustainable, especially something as currently unconventional as social emotional learning, even though it's very instinctive, is for just us to keep doing what we're doing with our full head, hearts, and hands in. I feel like however we model the work that we do at whatever scale, at whatever kind of work we're doing, whatever medium, and however we can change the mindset of different ecosystem players. I think if we are able to keep doing that, hopefully we'll be able to recognize SEL as not just, oh yeah, there's one thing called SEL, but a skill that's required along with arithmetic and numeracy skills. And hopefully with everyone on this call and more people who are doing similar work, more people are doing things at scale, not at scale, I think everything is required to actually take this forward.
Thank you so much, everyone. Since people have other calls and we all need to drop off, just wanted to thank everyone who has attended this session, especially the panelists for taking out the time, for curating all the material and talking through your experiences and learnings. It's been extremely enriching to hear not just your learnings, but also the challenges and things that we all need to do together as an ecosystem. Thanks a lot for that. And we hope that we keep finding opportunities to collaborate and work together in future, and so that our work does not exist in silos. Thank you so much for the links as well. Would request everyone who's still here to quickly fill out this feedback. It will just take a minute, and it will be useful for the facilitators and the participants and everybody to just sort of fill this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. It was very insightful journey for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best with all your work.
Thank you, Pratishtha. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.